I know this sounds silly, and I know that I might sound ridiculous, like this is the scene of the movie where the guy's trying to get a hold of the long-lost son, you know, but this is that scene. This is that scene, and I think they have those scenes in movies because they're true. See, this is the scene of the movie where you help me out.
Best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
I need the best.
I had the best words.
Well, I'm the best there is.
The best. We the best.
Have a chance to be the best of the best.
You are now listening to Best of the Best, presented by Radar Studios. Starring two guys who use their middle initial to sound cool. Here are your hosts, Neal E. Fisher and Mark P. Smith.
Hey Neal, what's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing much. Welcome to the podcast.
Just sitting in front of the microphone, getting ready to podcast.
Yeah, so we were just talking about, Neal and I, about this 100 films in a year thing, and we're trying to figure out if there's an official list or not, and if anyone knows, please hit us up. But we were interested in not only doing it personally for our own cinephile database of knowledge, but also to maybe talk about on the show too, in terms of like what like keeping like kind of a log of what we've seen and.
Well, yeah, and I'm curious to see, is this challenge only you watch like 100 famous films that are curated, and it's like, oh, well, you have to see these 100 films, or is it just random? Because I've seen a couple lists while we were like Googling here. One of them was 100 new movies every year. Like you have to watch, almost like, you have to read like a certain number of books every year. And then the other one was, no, here is, 100 films you have to see
before you die.
Before you die.
Yeah. Maybe we'll look into it. Maybe we'll figure out something that we want to do that seems like worthy for the podcast for discussion as well. So
have you heard of this podcast called The Worst Idea of All Time?
No.
I forget who told me about this, or maybe I heard it somewhere else. But if I'm correct, and I could be wrong, but these guys watch the same movie every week for a year. And the first season, I believe, they watched Sex and the City 2.
Oh.
And every episode is just them at something new that they catch and they talk about. And then now I think they've recently done Grown Ups 2. So I could be wrong, but
every week?
I think they watch it every week for a year.
Oh, man. So 52 times you have to watch Grown Ups 2.
It sounds terrible. Yeah, this
One
says...
time is way too many.
Yeah, the worst idea of all time, watching Grown Ups 2 every week for a year and recording a podcast of their weekly viewing. That's insane. Yeah, season 2 was Sex and the City 2.
That's like some movie nerd stunt stuff.
It's like that's like the David Blaine of movie nerd podcasting. Because at least pick a movie that maybe has a lot of layers, but maybe Sex and the City 2 doesn't.
Well, I think that's the challenge, right?
Or just glib.
And you watch, and that's sort of the novelty of it, where you're like, oh, these guys watched that terrible movie that many times. Anyway,
are you ready to respect the cock?
Yeah. And tame the cunt.
If you don't know what we're talking about,
I don't like that word.
it's probably not good. So I want you're going to intro this because you brought up the idea.
Yeah.
This is our first in a series of our best of the best directing. Well, let me start that over.
Yeah.
This is the first in our best of the best director series.
Yes.
So this is the Criterion collection of directors' filmographies in the best of the best DVD show.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to showcase our favorite directors, Neal and I's top people we that has a catalog of films that we really admire, and just kind of go through their films and do what we normally do and rank them at the end and determine what the best of the best of each of these filmmakers' library is. And
maybe send us some that you'd like us to talk about.
Yeah,
if we have a good enough,
I think we'll have some auteurs that we'll talk about, but also maybe there's I'm sure we'll figure out some surprising.
It'd be good to create a calendar to let everyone know, so then they can watch movies in anticipation with us. So if we September 20th is going to be David Fincher.
Yeah.
everyone has time then to watch all the movies before then.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that people that listen to this podcast will hopefully have seen a lot of these movies too, but I see what you're saying. You're right.
Yeah. Well, no, that might help people, you know. And
or maybe it'll inspire them to watch it after the discussion, you know.
Or that
after
too,
our dumb takes on it. But today, or let's just backtrack a little bit. I think I wanted to just point out that I think it's important when we're talking about movies to talk about the director, because the director in so many ways, and a lot of people are saying that the world is turning into super producers now. A lot of especially with the people that own, you know, that are operating a lot of the comic book franchises and Star Wars and all the bigger.
Right, the Kevin Feige.
Yeah, more people are you know, more people have there's more producers now that are sort of household names, like the Bruckheimers and things. But really the director is the author of the film. And a great director is all the difference, I think, in turning what could be a good script into a great movie, or mediocre script into a pretty watchable film. So that said, today is really special for me. We're talking about Paul Thomas Anderson.
I'm really excited because
P.T. Anderson, as I call him, because we're friends. So
I just the contributions he's made to the cinematic universes of Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil Afterlife, Retribution, and the final chapter.
Those are some of the best ones. I think we can just cut to the chase, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I know he wrote all 6 of the Resident Evil films, but
yeah,
he only directed 1, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. That's Paul W.S. Anderson, which I think people confuse. Like when Alien vs. Predator came out, they're like, man, we're going to get a P.T. Anderson version of Alien vs. Predator?
Oh, man. Wouldn't that be amazing? Or terrible. Who knows?
It could go either way.
But yeah, P.T. Anderson is what we're talking about. Directed such films as Heart 8, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, The Master,
Punch Drunk Love. There Will Be Blood.
I was just kind of to name a few, but then
he only has so many, so he just named them all. Inherent Vice.
Yeah, P.T., just to give you a little background, is a writer-director. He writes most of his films he's done are original screenplays. They're usually based on something, based on maybe an article or a book, but they're pretty much a departure from whatever the original source. I mean, not a departure, but they're more that's kind of the starting point, and then he expands on them. And that's interesting in many respects because there are not, in my opinion, there are not a lot of great directors that can do both really well. That can write well, but also have an eye for what is cinematically pleasing. You know what I mean?
Translate
have a vision. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think most great directors that aren't writers, quote unquote, are also. I mean, you have to be a writer. You know, they have to be a certain writer at some degree because they have to translate the material or make the dialogue work. So it's not to say that other directors like Scorsese or someone who's not really technically a writer on the film or isn't heavily involved in the script process. But a guy like P.T., he's just sitting at a typewriter. I'm sure he's
in a coffee shop going tick,
yeah.
tick, 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 ding.
Starbucks with a
no wonder it took him so
paper.
long between There Will Be Blood to have another movie.
But I think he's one of the rare guys in the post Spielberg Scorsese generation. I guess he's kind of in the Fincher generation.
Well, it's funny that you say that, just to cut you off a little bit. I think he doesn't get a lot of credit for being in the 90s independent renaissance because Heart 8 came out, in 97.
Right,
he was
right along Pulp Fiction.
Right, so era, right around that era, and he was, within the Sundance Institute, when it was first starting, working on his script, and I think a lot of people don't give him credit for that because, that's a great first movie. I know he based it off his short film, which I think was Cigarettes and Coffee, I think it might have been called.
Right.
But, the thing about him that I like is, there's different waves like we've talked about before. There's the 90s independent renaissance, and then you have the 70s WizKids. I forget the name they call themselves, but that was basically I think one of the most famous groups of all time. With Spielberg, De Palma, Spielberg, and Coppola, Ron Howard, all that.
I started with De Palma.
But I think going over Paul Thomas Anderson's filmography and the way he shoots, his love for film, just like Spielberg and Scorsese and everyone, that he would belong right there with them, like if he was born in that era.
Yeah, I think his films, when you watch them, because he will, just to give you a little more background too before we dive into the films, he is very much inspired by directors like Sidney Lumet and
Robert Altman.
Obviously, Robert Altman is a huge inspiration for him, and he's not shy about talking about these things. Although he doesn't have a lot of interviews, there's not a lot of press out there for like if you try to. There is some stuff, but he doesn't talk about particular films too much. He usually, if you get anything from him, he talks about like sort of more abstract cinema, like his inspiration, things like that. And but you can tell he's heavily influenced by these guys, and I think like you're right, he would fit really well into that era, like especially in the sort of 70s, more dramatic, sort of character based, like really actor heavy.
Well, you can see it in all of it. I mean, he's a huge Scorsese Spielberg fan, and you can see that in his work. And as far as Altman and his influence, Altman was so good at writing many characters with their own stories and own problems, and then intertwining them in such a seamless way that you didn't really feel like it was too much coming at you,
like disjointed.
Which is, I mean, and that's basically most of PT's work is that way. I mean, at least his early work is just many different characters and how they intertwine.
Yeah, it's a feat in itself, and like I said, for a writer to do that. And be successful at writing dialogue like that, writing rich characters like that, and directing, and making a film that's very cinematic. To me, I think a lot of his films are beautiful. Robert Elswit is a long-time collaborator. He shot most of his films.
I love Robert Elswit.
They shoot outside of Hard 8, and I think The Master. They shot everything anamorphic, which is, I think, it's just you can. I think most people that watch movies couldn't tell like anamorphic between whatever this, that, and the other in digital or something. But for me, I can always like tell, and I think I really fell. This sounds cheesy, but I really fell in love with that format, like seeing it, like viewing it as a film goer, watching PT's movies. So another staple in his films, I think, another visual cue is a lot of long takes. Like he's really good at letting the actors do their thing, and he casts very well. He casts like really interesting longtime collaborators with John C. Reilly, Philip Seymour Hoffman, those kind of guys, Philip Baker Hall, guys that have been with him for doing a lot of movies with him. And I think he does a lot of the Scorsese camera moves, a lot of the long dollies and long Steadicam shots. What I like about him too, I think is really interesting, and you may not really pick up on it, is he is a big fan of like the accidents, especially like camera movements, because his films consist of so many camera movements. There's like point A, point B, point C kind of thing. A lot like Spielberg too, where he's like making up like 3 shots in one. Sometimes if he bumps the camera or something happens, if the take is great, like if the actor is brilliant, he like puts it in the movie. And Robert Elswit has been on record saying like he just hates some of the takes that the PT picks. Because for him as a DP, it doesn't bode well for him. Because
right, as a DP, you don't want to have those operator errors.
I think he likes that like kind of almost breaking the third wall kind of thing. You know what I mean? He likes the idea of like this is a movie. And
I think that's a good comparison. Like, if you're going to break down his film style and his techniques, just like any famous director, really, but. His tracking shots are very Scorsese, obviously, with, we'll get to it, but with Boogie Nights, the opening is sort of an ode to the Copacabana opening of Goodfellas.
Right.
And Touch of Evil by Orson Welles, great opening there. But as far as Spielberg's concerned, like you said, there's great video essays on Spielberg's oneers, and Paul Thomas Anderson does do that, where a scene you think, it might start on an insert of, say, a cigarette, and you're thinking, oh, this is just an insert of the cigarette. We get it, the guy's smoking, but then the camera tracks, and then it turns on to the guy smoking, and then someone enters the room, and then the camera pans to that guy and follows him to his desk, and it's all in one take, but he got 3 different shots without having to cut.
Right.
And that is, I think, sort of that aspect of his filmmaking. And there's actually so many great video essays that you can get now with YouTube and Vimeo, but there's a great video essay on Paul Thomas Anderson and how a lot of his films. I think it was There Will Be Blood. They were talking about how it has limited cuts, and there's just 4 or 5 shots in one.
Right.
One little story I wanted to tell real quick because we're starting at the beginning. There's a great story, and if you haven't heard it, I'll tell you right now. If you have, sorry if you've heard it before, but Paul Thomas Anderson gave an interview about how he enrolled at New York University. My guess is because that's where Scorsese went, and he was inspired by him and Spike Lee. But he talks about why he dropped out of film school and his experience there, and it's sort of a famous story where he remembers being in a class, and the first thing the teacher said was, if anyone is here to write Terminator 2, get out. And Anderson thought, well, what if I do want to write Terminator 2? Right. Terminator 2 is a pretty awesome movie. And after that, then what he decided to do was, for his first assignment, he handed in a page from a David Mamet script, one of the best writers of all time, and the teacher gave it a C+, and Anderson knew he had to leave, so he lived off his NYU tuition and worked on a short film with the money.
That's a great story. My buddy told me that. Actually, my buddy, who's a big avid fan of us, the Veal Chop, turned me on to. He's the one that turned me on to Paul Thomas Anderson in college. Actually, starting with Boogie Nights, and he had told me that same story, and I was like, man, that's my kind of dude. Because I do think like he's kind of more a secretive guy. So I do think Paul Thomas gets a sort of bad rap in terms of being like sort of this reclusey, like hipstery, whatever, like.
Yeah, like pretentious
filmmaker guy, and I'm sure he's a lot of those things. But I think he's brilliant, and I'm looking forward to all the upcoming films. So I think to start off, we should get right into it. Now, with other directors, Paul Thomas being a sort of younger director, somewhat, and more of a Terrence Malick-y kind of guy that doesn't make a lot of films, hasn't made a lot of films. We're going to go through his films chronologically because there's not a lot of them, and then we'll give our thoughts at the end and rank them. And, I think with other directors, they'll have a lot more films. And we'll be, a little more choosy in what we discuss. But for today, we'll kind of take you on a journey through all the films. A couple of shorts that he did, I'd like to just point out real quick because I think they relate to the features. I don't think they relate. They do relate to his features. One of the first things he made was the Dirk Diggler story. It was a short film he shot on video. If you haven't seen it, I think you can find it on the internet, like some kind of ripped copy of it. And I've watched it. It's not great, but there's definitely like a lot of like clues and signs to like a burgeoning film. Like a guy that obviously knows what he's doing. And it's really a mockumentary based on John Holmes, the famous porn star. And actually, more particularly, it's based on a documentary called Exhausted, John C. Holmes, The Real Story. And basically, Paul Thomas he was a big fan of 70s adult films. And
if I remember from an interview I heard of him, I think he lived across the street from a house that would film pornos
like
all the time.
A family member of his or something. Because I think he grew up in the Valley, and that's where a lot of that...
Yeah, he grew up in the Valley, and I think it might have been on Marin. He said... that across the street they were filming a porno there, and he was always like really interested by it. Yeah, and that's what sort of inspired Boogie Nights, is because he was just curious about how those movies were made and what went into them.
And that's the one thing about his films too. I'll just say right at the top is a lot of these films take place in California and the LA area, and I think that's one thing that you don't see a lot in films like LA. You see LA a lot in a lot of movies, obviously, but there's a particular way that he shoots that sort of suburban valley aspect of LA, which I think is not readily seen in films outside of like Karate Kid or something. So,
and I think a lot of people look down on the valley because they think it's over the hill,
right?
And when in reality, there's a lot to be shown there, and he definitely photographs it.
But they make like the strip malls and all that stuff seem like pretty photographically interesting. In fact, when I was there, our DP buddy who was on the show, Brandon Cox, when I was visiting with him, I said, "Man, you know where they shot Magnolia? You know where you shot Boogie Nights?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I know those places." So like we would drive around. I just thought it just looks like a shitty strip mall, but to me it was like seeing like where the Psycho House was or something. So but back to so Dirk Diggler's short story, he made that in 1988, and that was kind of his first first kind of, I don't know, not major film, but first notable piece that he did. After that, through as Neal pointed out, he did go to NYU and then ended up dropping out, spending some of his NYU tuition money on making a short called Cigarettes and Coffee. And this was his first collaboration with Philip Baker Hall, which he would go on to pretty much cast in almost every movie he's done since. This film is important, or the short is important, because this is what really got him noticed. Like, this film, they played at Sundance, and this is what really got him like in the door, basically to finance his first feature called Hard Eight, which is basically a feature film version of Cigarettes and Coffee. Also starring Philip Baker Hall, who plays Sidney in the film. And if you watch Hard Eight, what I like about that film compared to his subsequent body of work, that one is like, you can tell he's got a style, but that's like the most Scorsese-ish kind of, like, there's a style, or there's a look about that, and a rhythm to that movie that I almost feel like he was like, oh, it's my first film, and I love Scorsese, I love all these people, it was like more emulating, as opposed to like, I'm gonna kind of do my own thing, which is like which is like more like Punch Drunk Love or Master, where it's kind of these weird, more weirder long scenes and stuff. You've seen Hard Eight, right?
Yeah, no, I love Hard Eight. I think I saw this movie, I want to say either before I worked at Blockbuster or when I worked at Blockbuster, and I liked Philip Baker Hall, and the plot intrigued me, and I didn't really know much about Paul Thomas Anderson, and I saw it, and I really, really liked it, and I just thought, like you said, the style is very evident there. There's a lot of long tracking shots, a lot of long takes. I think there's one where like Sidney, played by Philip Baker Hall, is walking around the floor, the game floor, and if you watch the movie, it's really great. I mean, he's going around craps tables, around blackjack tables, and it's a really long take. There's a great small performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman at the craps table. He's sort of like a rambunctious craps player, and great performance by
one of his best.
Oh yeah,
I love that.
He's great in that. Gwyneth Paltrow is really good, and so is a really young John C. Reilly. But you can definitely tell too, like you said, it's his first feature, but he definitely took some chances, and he tried to be himself, which is pretty great that he did that. But it's a great movie, and Phil Baker Hall is just awesome. And I wish he actually would have worked with him more, but I believe after Magnolia, that's kind of where their collaboration ended. But the 3 movies he did work on him with are really, really good.
Yeah, and what I like about basically all his films, and I think this is what I like about a lot of Tarantino's stuff too, is they'll do these long takes, and then they'll have a close-up. They'll cut to a close-up, and it's always a surprise. Like, even if you've seen the movie, like, it's not always a surprise. Like, if someone's going for something on a table and they cut to the table, like, that's like just a match-on thing, that's fine. But like, a lot of times there's a long tracking shot, and you're like, this shot could keep going. But then all of a sudden, it like will cut to something else, like right in the middle of something. I guess what I'm saying is more like, as an editor, I love the kind of surprising cuts. You know what I mean? Like, sort of the, like, you're kind of like, oh, like surprising, but not like jarring, and that's really evident in this film, and then much more so in the subsequent films. But one thing about Philip Seymour Hoffman I thought was interesting, doing my sort of a little more background with Hard Eight, because I have not seen Hard Eight in a long time, and it's hard to find.
It is hard to find.
And I had a DVD of it, and I don't have a DVD player anymore because I've kind of given up on hard discs. But I didn't realize that Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is kind of based on Midnight Run that he was in. He had a small part in there and his name was Sidney, and that one spelled with an I. And so that's why Paul Thomas, he was so, and like, he just like basically like wanted to work with Philip Baker Hall from that moment on. He was like, I got to put him in a movie. And then he convinced him to be in a short, and he named his character Sidney with a Y, just as a homage to that film, which I think I never knew before. So I think that's really interesting. As a little trivia.
No, that's great, and I think definitely check out Hard Eight.
Yeah.
What was I going to say about it? Oh, it's just what's great about it is sort of like a neo-noir, and what Anderson does so well in this one compared to, each movie he does gets bigger and bigger for a while. And what's nice about Hard Eight is it's a very intimate story between Philip Baker Hall, John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow for most of the movie, and then Samuel L. Jackson a little bit too. But he really just, makes it a nice, almost small stakes movie between really interesting characters, and it definitely lays the groundwork in what his next movie is, which is just 10 times as big.
And I see, and for me, John C. Reilly, he's one of my favorite actors, if not my favorite actor, because I think he's he's not one of those guys that's in those like dramatic roles where he's like Daniel Day-Lewis or something, or where he's like
Right.
I feel like he's very like almost effortlessly great in everything he does, and this being their first collaboration, you can really tell there's an understanding between those guys, like because they're kind of weird, like Paul Thomas is kind of a weird guy, John C. Reilly is kind of a weird guy. All these guys he kind of casts that are in his films regularly are are a little bit bizarre, and I think they kind of get it. One little trivia I think it's interesting, and if you've seen Hard Eight, if you're a Paul Thomas fan, you probably know this, but the film was originally titled Sydney, and then up until the release, it was named that, and then they called it. Then they changed it to Hard Eight. This was when since this was Paul Thomas's first film, there wasn't a lot. He didn't have a lot of control. In fact, all his films subsequently he's had last cut on, so he, whatever edit the director approves is what they release. And this wasn't the case in this film, in this film, because like I said, this was his first film, so he didn't have a lot of control. And then they ultimately he argued for his cut, and ultimately they came to a compromise where they said, we're going to change the name and you get your cut, and he was like, okay. So he still refers to it as Sydney, but he doesn't talk about this film that much. I think it kind of left a bad taste in his mouth in terms of dealing with studios and all that. So, but yeah, definitely check it out if you can find it. I want to say maybe it's streaming on something, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll look right now.
The next film we'll talk about, and this is probably his most popular film in terms of like, if you said like, oh, what does he think, and then you said this, people go, oh, I've seen that,
And I think this movie, what's interesting about it too is that I feel like when it came out, it was. I mean, I know people respected it and reviewed it well, but I feel like it's gonna last a lot longer. The one you're about to talk about.
You can't stream it anywhere. Hard Eight. Sorry, we were just looking at the streaming availability of Hard Eight, and it's not streaming anywhere. So if you have a DVD copy of it, hold on to it. And the next film we're talking about is one of my personal favorites, and really my introduction to Paul Thomas. I ended up not seeing Hard Eight until I watched this next one, which is Boogie Nights, and that was came out in 1997. And Boogie Nights, if you haven't seen it, is essentially the sort of the what's the word? Kind of the portrayal of the porn industry in the 70s and 80s through the lens of one character, like not one character, multiple characters, but sort of one through one.
Well, it's sort of it's a role reversal. I mean, you have the classic story of like the small town girl takes the bus to L.A. and to become a big star, and when she gets there, it's a lot different than she thought, and she like falls into the wrong people. And this is a story of a young guy, who's a busboy, and Burt Reynolds is a famous porn director, and discovers him basically and turns him into overnight, pretty much, from a busboy into the John Holmes of this universe. And like we said before, I mean, you're getting, the director, you're getting the guys who live in the houses that are helping make the movies, the sound guys, who's obsessed with them. Scotty J was Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's great. Oh, you look great. You're just awesome.
Really sexy.
You're so sexy. Oh, and that one scene where he tries to kiss me, he's like, I'm a fucking idiot, man.
Here.
And then, John C. Reilly, and then he falls, he basically, it's kind of funny now that I think about it when I'm saying this, but it's Mark Wahlberg who plays Dirk Diggler, his name's Eddie Adams, but he plays Dirk Diggler is his porn name.
Eddie Adams from Torrance.
And it's just funny now that I think about it. He basically forms an entourage, like Mark Wahlberg in real life, and they form this entourage and they get into some like hairy shit, with Thomas Jane, Philip Seymour Hoffman, John C. Reilly, and Don Cheadle a little bit.
Yeah. Paul Thomas has famously said this movie is about a family. It's about people seeking a family, either because their own family has shunned them or their own their own personal story has fallen apart in some way. And I think that's very true when you watch this film. To me, it's also like on the surface, it's about a lot of people that are very mediocre at what they do. Like when you think about it, they all have these delusions that they're better at, performing music than they are. I'm sure Jack Horner, played by Burt Reynolds, the director, is probably, there's a sense that he kind of is, he wants to be a real filmmaker. He wants to like make real films, and people just want to see, fucking on screen, and he's like kind of like fighting that. So there's like this real like conversion of people that are trying to achieve like their real dreams, although they're not very good at those things. Like they're kind of just better at doing the adult film thing. And this is another ensemble cast. This is a large cast compared to Hard Eight, and every one of these people is so interesting and well done. Like just well portrayed in the movie. And I think with the likes of William H. Macy, Burt Reynolds, who subsequently had to be like basically almost forced into doing this movie because he did not like being in a film about the porn industry, and Paul Thomas Anderson just kept begging him and begging him and begging him, and he said he finally like agreed to do it. They had a lot of knockout like fist fights on the set. Like they did not really get along that well. And it's funny because when you watch the film, like this is Burt Reynolds' best portrayal ever as an actor. Like it's so, certainly his last great one. And
well, he didn't even want to do the movie in the first place. Like Paul Thomas Anderson asked Warren Beatty to be the to be the part of Jack Horner, and Warren Beatty said he wanted to play Dirk Diggler, and so he said no. And then I read a story where Burt Reynolds came on set the first day with an Irish accent for no reason.
Right.
And Paul Thomas Anderson said he can't do that. And they definitely were.
I mean, it's so crazy because when you watch the film, and maybe that tension is what helped, catapult his performance. But, he ultimately won a Golden Globe. He was nominated for an Oscar. And
that's the thing.
You read these stories, you're like, how did this even work if they were so opposed to each other? And even after the film, even after all the accolades, he was like, I won't work with Paul Thomas ever again, blah, blah, blah.
Well, he watched the movie and then fired his agent after he watched the movie, and then he got nominated for an Oscar. And what else is funny, too, here, I just learned Leonardo DiCaprio was Paul Thomas Anderson's first choice to play Dirk Diggler, but he turned it down to do Titanic, but he had just worked with Mark Wahlberg on The Basketball Diaries and recommended Mark to Paul Thomas Anderson, and then I guess at a later time, Leo said, my biggest regret is Boogie Nights. I'm a huge fan of P.T. Anderson, but the first time I had met him, I hadn't really seen much of his previous work, and now I love that movie.
Which was one movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I think Leonardo DiCaprio is a great actor. He would have done a good job in that movie, too.
I think what sells this movie, though, is Mark Wahlberg himself is a very green actor.
Yeah.
He wasn't that great at the time.
Say. Yeah. Because he's raw and a little more fresh, it works in terms of him being the sort of child that turns into a man, that like goes through the, sort of growing pains of being a young adult, basically, in this weird porn world.
He pretty much was Eddie Adams. And I guess Sam Jackson, he offered the part of Buck Swope, which ended up going to Don Cheadle.
Yeah.
But he said, what the hell is this, when he read the script, which is kind of a mistake on his part, but Don Cheadle is really, really good.
Yeah, Don Cheadle is great. And the funny thing is when you see, if you haven't seen Boogie Nights and you think about, like 70s and 80s porn, okay, cool, this will be like, and yes, there's like, salacious things in it, there's boobs and stuff, but it really is like a movie about, it's really not, like if you're trying to watch that movie for like any of the sexual parts of it, you're really going to be, you know, mistaken, because it's really, really more, you know, it's a drama, you know.
Well, I think what Roger Ebert, I think, might have said it about P.T. Anderson. I don't know if it's for a different film, but he was saying, you know, his movies, you have all these different characters who seem like they have all these different things going on, but at the end of the day, all the characters just want something really bad, and maybe they won't get it, but everyone's trying really hard. Like Dirk wants to be a star, Jack Horner wants to be a legitimate director, but he just knows where his place is. You know, Scotty J wants to be with Dirk and wants to, you know, have a relationship or wants to be loved. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's all these like really big things on the outside, but on the inside, it's just like very simple problems that everyone has. I
love John C. Reilly, as I told you, and like the scene where they're at the cabana and he's like, people say I look like Han Solo, and he talk about Star Wars. It's, you know, one of my favorites. Look it up on YouTube.
One of my favorite scene is when him and Mark Wahlberg are in the studio.
Oh yeah,
and he's like, is it Mark Wahlberg who goes, hey, can you just drop the bass?
Yeah.
And he's like,
yeah, can you move the bass up a couple octaves? Like they're just using always terminology.
We will rock you. Wait, what's the song he sings terribly? It's the Transformers one,
right?
You
got the touch.
You've got the touch.
Yeah. And
it's so good. I dig it, Kurt.
Yeah, what I love about this film too, and I was talking about Hard Eight being a Scorsese thing, but this movie is definitely that too, because if you think about the arc of it, where it's like starts off very innocent.
Oh, this is full Scorsese, yeah.
And then it gets to a really dark time, and a lot of this film is based on John Holmes's, like there's a lot of parts that are ripped right from the documentary. Even some of there's the documentary within the movie where Amber Waves makes about the stars, and, you know, about Dirk Diggler, and there's a whole arc to it, and there's a really dark sort of third act to it that's very much reminiscent of like Goodfellas or whatever, or any kind of like, you know,
shit hits the fan.
You go up and then we come down kind of story. I think this is where he really, like, because I'm sure because of budget too, like he was able to flex or the visual, his visual muscles. I mean, there's a lot of those whip pans that are very signature, you know, where they kind of, you know, change scenes by just, you know, literally just whipping the camera, you know, to one side.
A lot of long tracks.
A lot of long tracks. And then the soundtrack. This is very much a Scorsese thing, where it's just a bunch of popular music of the era, you know, sort of B-sides and deep cuts, disco songs and what have you. So even
the last scene of this movie is ripped right from Raging Bull.
Yeah,
it's a complete homage.
Yeah, that's a great scene, and
I'm a star.
Yeah,
I'm a fucking star.
It's a perfect way to end that film, and you're right. It is very much like Raging Bull, and he and Paul Thomas isn't shy in, you know, in saying these things. Like these are the films he admires, and that's what I like about like Tarantino and Paul Thomas and that generation of directors, is they have like such a library of films at that point, like and some, it's like it's almost hard to like not include that aesthetically in your filmmaking. Like it's almost hard, like if you're so inspired and, you know, like by certain directors.
Well, the reason I respect him more than Tarantino though is he'll unabashedly admit who he's homaging and who he loves, and not just pretend that he came up with it for the first time.
I guess we won't be doing a Tarantino director series. Yeah, so pretty much, if you haven't seen Boogie Nights, which there might be some people out there, but if you haven't, definitely see it. This isn't one movie that I watch at least once a year. I catch new things every time. There's a lot of great.
I'm forgetting about Roller
scenes.
Girl, Heather Graham.
Yeah.
So many great characters in here. Luis Guzman.
Yep.
I just
and Don Cheadle's great too. I don't want to.
No, Don Cheadle's great. I mean, there's that one scene where he looks like Rick James at the
Right.
party, and he's just like sitting alone at the table, which is kind of funny. Tom Jane is really good in this. Like his entrance into the cabana party. I forget what scene it is, but he like rolls right in and he's like
works for the Party Boys or whatever.
Yeah, and he like comes in and he's like look at all this bush or whatever.
Yeah.
I forget what he says. He's like such a dick. But yeah, I remember it was 2003. I was in college, and a dude who's a friend of mine, he's like, "Man, have you seen Boogie Nights?" And I was like, "No, I haven't seen it." And I was like, "That's that porn movie, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, but no, it's really good, man. You got to check it out." And he's like, "I'll bring you the DVD." And he brought me the DVD, and I remember I watched it, and then I think I watched it again, and then it had a lot of special features, and I watched all of those, and I was just like, "Man, this." And then I had realized, I was like, "Oh, this is that dude from Hard 8." man, this is like a completely different jump. And yeah, ever since then, I think in college I might have even seen, the next film we're going to talk about. But what year did that come out? Magnolia.
90s. 1999.
So yes, I did see the Magnolia right after that then, because he let me borrow this and Magnolia, and I remember I kept them for like the whole year.
So yeah, moving right along, segue.
Mm-hmm.
The next film in the Paul Thomas Anderson list is Magnolia, and I guess I'm just going to say right at the top, this is my favorite movie of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably will spoil at least where I'm at on the best of the best Paul Thomas Anderson list. But this is,
I mean,
if anyone asks me what my favorite movie is, and it's hard to like, it's always a hard thing to say like, oh, that is, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many great movies out there, and I think it's interchangeable depending on what genre you're talking about or whatever. But this is if
really,
I had to go with one, this is my favorite. So
this is really his masterpiece.
yeah,
I think he was uninhibited. He had just come off the loss of his father. He got, the cast is insane. He basically was able to do, after the success of Boogie Nights, I think he was able to do whatever he wanted.
yeah.
And, this movie is long. It's 3 hours, 9 minutes. But, and I'm sure the studio was not, I can't remember the stories, but I don't think they were happy that it was so long.
Well, I have some little tidbits.
Oh,
about
cool.
that.
But I was just going to say, like, with this movie, this is Paul Thomas Anderson, unhinged, uninhibited, firing on full cylinders. And it just works. And
Yeah.
I'll say more about the movie, but I'll let you do your trivia first. And then.
Well, this is, I think, in a nutshell, what happened with this movie is Boogie Nights was a pretty big success, like a decent success. And I think the New Line Cinema, who had distributed and financed Boogie Nights and Magnolia, basically, I think he had a lot of goodwill. He had a lot of good, like, he was like, all right, we can, what do you want to do next? Oh, I got this Magnolia script. I got this script, about these, whatever it is, eight main characters, whatever. That all intertwine. Okay, great. Let's make that movie. It was a very substantial budget for him at the time, and for a movie like that, I can't remember exactly what it was, but moving forward, the movie came out, and it wasn't like Boogie Nights. It wasn't a very commercially, like you said, it was long. And the reason why it's long is because that is Paul Thomas's version of the movie, just like Boogie Nights is. On all of his films, he has, like I mentioned before, it's a rare thing for a studio to give out, but he has director's cut, so he has the last say on what the edit of the film is, and that's probably the reason why. Now, subsequently, and even last year on Mark Maron, he actually said that maybe it should be cut down, which I thought was pretty funny, because I'm sure a lot of people at New Line were like, "Oh, fuck," because what ended up happening was Michael DeLuca, who was one of the founding producers of New Line, who greenlit Magnolia, it was such a bomb, it was such a financial loss for them, that they ended up firing Michael DeLuca, from New Line, who actually, like I said, was one of the main guys that started that film and greenlit movies like Menace to Society. I think he was maybe instrumental with maybe in the Bob Shea Nightmare on Elm Street first couple movies too.
Well, DeLuca is the reason Tom Cruise did the movie. I mean, he helped convince Cruise because he was nervous after it was offered to him.
That's what I was going to say. What I love about this film, and so Magnolia, we're not really talking about a lot of plots of these films, just because if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But Magnolia essentially is a converging of characters that are all interrelated in some way or another, and you really don't know that until the movie starts to reveal itself, till the plot unwinds, and so it's almost like separate movies. Like everyone has like their own separate story, and you're cutting back and forth between them, and then they sort of converge. That's like it's building to a crescendo, and I think that's very evident when you watch the movie. And the acting in this film is insane. Like, it's top notch. There's so many.
Yeah.
Jason Robards in his last movie, like literally dying. Philip Seymour Hoffman is insanely good. John C. Reilly is insanely good.
Yep.
Tom Cruise, this is one of his best portrayals.
Well, yeah, speaking of Tom Cruise, who I'm a huge fan of, this is one of his best roles ever, and this probably should have been the movie, actually maybe I'll say 100%, that he should have won the Oscar for supporting actor. He lost to Michael Caine, who won for Cider House Rules, but
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine. But he already had won for Hannah and Her Sisters, years before. And this is really, I mean, the arc. It's almost a twist in the movie about who Tom Cruise is in this movie.
That scene where he goes to visit his dad, Jason Robards, is.
Yeah,
I mean, it's his best. It's his best acting moment on film ever. I mean,
he's so good because you think of in the beginning of the movie, you're like, oh, Tom Cruise is playing this chauvinistic, pig, snake oil salesman, and oh, I figured this would be Tom Cruise. He's good looking. He's going to be an asshole. And then when it turns out that, you find out who his family is, him and Julianne Moore and his dealing with like Philip Seymour Hoffman and Jason Robards, and that, once again, like we said, each of these characters has all these extraordinary circumstances and coincidences, and they're all intertwined. If you look at this movie, if you have nothing else to do, if you haven't seen it yet, YouTube it, watch the opening of the movie. Ricky Jay, famous magician and actor, narrates the opening about how coincidence plays a role in life and how crazy it is, and it's shot beautifully, the opening. And then the opening of the actual movie, which is the introduction to all the characters of Magnolia, you can also YouTube that, the character introductions. One thing that I think you should notice is Paul Thomas Anderson's style is so frenetic, going from Julianne Moore to Jason Robards to William H. Macy playing Quiz Kid Donnie Smith to Jason
Riley,
Philip Baker Hall,
yeah,
how he's this famous like Bob Barker type host, but who has like a dirty past, and then his granddaughter. But then if you notice and watch this, you can see it on YouTube. Everyone's style is so frenetic, and then it gets to John C. Reilly, and the camera's still, it's locked off, and it doesn't move, and then he's like. Yeah. He's like working out, and you hear him listening to his dating profile voice machine tape that like people used to look on the newspapers for, and he's like, I'm 32, I work out, I'm a police officer, and then he's like talking to himself.
But it's all about assuming what these people are, and then they reveal themselves as something else. And I think that's the great part about John C. Reilly's character too, is he has like. Like you said, you show them, and visually, like you introduce all these characters, and it's like camera move, we're on this person, we're on that person. Then all of a sudden, we just cut to a complete lock off in a boring apartment of like John C. Reilly just like having cereal, like laughing.
Yeah, just
at
like
Today's Show,
a lonely
taking
dude.
a shower. Yeah, like working out, like on his like feeble kind of workout bench, and he's such a straight and narrow kind of like cop dude, and then as the movie reveals itself, you learn that he has fears, and he has he's a real like a three-dimensional person like we all are, and I think that's
and that's like every character in this movie. I mean, his first scene when he's like in the car, you think he's giving this grand voiceover, and he's like, you think he might be like training another cop,
right? And
he's like, I come out here and my goal is not to hurt anyone and to do what's right. And then it cuts out and he's by himself. And the same thing with Philip Baker Hall. You see all these camera flashes. You see how famous he was as a host, Chuck Woolery type or whatever. And then it goes, it's someone else's talking about him, like giving him an award. And it's like, we're giving it to Jimmy Gator, famous family man. And then he's like banging another woman.
Yeah.
And it's really great. And every person in this movie has two sides. It has what everyone thinks they are, and then what they really are. Yeah. And he does. And some people may call it melodramatic, or they might call it long or whatever. But it's weaved together so beautifully. Robert Elswit again, man. Robert Elswit is the man.
Yeah, this film is beautiful. I mean, it's such a gorgeous film, and like I said, it takes place in the valley. I mean, it is like it's probably the most least photographically pleasing area in maybe all of California, all of LA. But it looks superb.
Oh, and the Amy Mann songs.
Yes. So that's the other thing about this film is this one's his almost the entire soundtrack, outside of a couple like sort of diegetic songs, were basically done by Amy Mann. They were written for this movie. It's a great soundtrack if you haven't heard it. I mean, just on its own, it's beautiful. Even if you don't like the movie, it's a great sound, just a great album. And there's a scene in the movie where they sing the song "Wise Up," where all the characters actually are singing the song.
Yeah,
and it's such a beautiful moment in the movie. And it's one of those funny things because people that learn that I love this film go, yeah, that was kind of cool, but it was long, and the frogs. I just don't understand the frogs part. And I'm like,
yeah, everyone says that.
Let me explain the frogs to you. But first, really, I always think like I would have more of a problem, and I don't have a problem with it. But if I'm someone that has a problem with this movie, I'd have more problem with people singing to themselves than I would. Do you know what I mean? Because that comes out of nowhere. But it's somehow, in my opinion, it just works in this film because
The whole movie is
everyone's converging. Like everything's converging, and you don't know where it's going. And then all of a sudden, these people have like a breath, and they sing the song, and the songs and the lyrics of the song, the content of the song, all relates to their story. You know. And to me, that's actually a weirder part than the frogs falling from the sky, if you can believe that. But somehow it works in the film. So the one thing that's interesting about this movie, it's another representation of, I think, Paul T's eye for detail. Is there's over 100 references to the I'm gonna get it wrong because I'm not a Bible guy, but the Exodus 8:2, Exodus 8:2. So there's a lot of 8s and 2s in this movie that are paired together. In almost every scene, there'll be like an 8. Like the opening has like the when they talk about like the plane that picks up the water to put out the fire has an 8:2 on it. There's a picture of when the guy the guy shoots his brains out. There's a 8:2 when the blood hits the picture. There's a picture of Magnolia. There's also almost every living room or every like sort of main kind of converging area in all the different locations in this movie have a magnolia flower represented too. And what's notable about Exodus 8:2 is in the Bible, and this has been translated, but it basically states, if you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs across your entire land. So that really references to the frogs. And essentially what that means is, and I think if you watch the movie, is Ricky Jay says it in his sort of almost end of the movie voiceover. He says this great line, which is, you may be through with the past, but the past is not through with you. And really what that means is everyone has some kind of like psychological trauma. You know, everyone carries with them sort of scars physically or emotionally or mentally throughout their whole life. And this is what these people are dealing with. Like the woman who's been, basically molested by her father, Jimmy Gator. There is Jason Robards, his like being a shitty dad is kind of what formulated the man that Tom Cruise is, which is kind of a shitty guy. And like you learn that all these people's pasts are what has created them, it was sort of created the issues in their present. And I think that's why the frogs scene is in the movie, because it's like almost like a rain. It's almost like a cleansing of these parts of these people's lives, and these frogs fall down. And like Ricky Jay says, this doesn't just happen. There's a reason why this just happen. Why these things happen. Yeah. So that's why I try to explain to the frogs. Everyone has a problem with it, but I think it's quite cool.
I can see the outline of your pants. It's evident that you like this movie. I love this movie too. Shout out to the editor, who I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Dylan Tischner. That's how I say it.
Dylan Tischner. Yeah, he's.
I think someone said online like Dylan Teichner or something.
Whatever it is,
yeah.
It's he just does a great job.
He's my favorite editor too, by the way.
I just there's not much else we can say about it. Make sure you watch this movie. It's it is really his masterpiece. So and we're moving on next to Punch Drunk Love.
Yep.
I love this movie.
2002.
2002. I have a lot to say about this movie. I think it's very, very underrated. I think people bypass it because it has Adam Sandler in it, but it's one of Adam Sandler's best performances. I think Adam Sandler, and you can crucify me for it, but I think he's a very underrated actor. I think when he has a good director and he wants to try, he is a very good actor. And I think he doesn't get credit for that. I understand why he does the movies that he does, because they make money. They have mass appeal. Everyone loves them. A lot of people love them. I think his earlier comedies are obviously funnier than his new ones. But when he has a good director, like Paul Thomas Anderson, it is really something. I think this character, Barry Egan, is really, if you took every character that Adam Sandler played, and every time that he goes off on a tangent and he yells and he has that famous voice, where he gets angry, and I'm trying to think of an example right now. Like basically Happy Gilmore. When you see Happy Gilmore get really angry and he screams and he yells at someone, Barry Egan is sort of the realistic interpretation of what that character would be like if it was in the real world.
Right.
He's neurotic. He has anxiety. He's full of angst. He's
very odd.
He's very odd.
Yeah.
He has his quirks. And Paul Thomas Anderson sets him apart from every frame by giving him that bright blue suit that he wears every day. And you're always transfixed on Adam Sandler. You're always watching him, what he's going to do. The movie is edited and shot in a way that physically that represents the way that Barry's mind thinks, where the camera's moving and then it's cutting and then it's whip panning and then it's in a close-up and then it's pulling back out again. And the music, the score in this movie is unbelievable. Just the constant
John Bryan, yeah.
Anytime Adam Sandler starts getting anxious and he starts getting upset, the music ramps up and it gets crazier. The performances, between Adam Sandler and Philip Seymour Hoffman in this movie are some of my favorite, and I quote with my friends all the time. And I'm not good with quotes, but I just love the fact where it goes, hello, my name is Barry Egan, and I called your service. Why don't you shut the fuck up? What? I said, calm down and shut the fuck up. Now, what's your problem? And it's like just the way that the mattress man.
Yeah.
And my favorite couple scenes is the one where he goes, Barry goes, you go fuck yourself. You go fuck yourself. My love was hurt. She got hurt. I'm in love with her, and you hurt her, and you were gonna fucking get hurt. You don't touch her. I love her. And he goes, calm down, shut the fuck up. And then he goes, shut up, shut up. And then my other favorite one though is at the end when he comes up, and he goes, are you the mattress man? And he's like, fuck you. And he goes, you're gonna leave me alone, or I'm going to call the police. Do you hear me? I'm going to call them, and I'm going to bring, what does he say? I forget the exact quote, but it's like, I'm going to do everything in my power to stop you. And he goes, fine. And then Barry Egan turns around, and Philip Seymour Hoffman waits till his back's turned, and he goes, fuck you. And he turns around, and he goes, I warned you. And he goes, that's that. Yeah. That's that. Because that's that, mattress man. Anyway, great behind the scenes. Watch the real commercial that Paul Thomas Anderson made for the mattress man. And the last thing I'll say before I give it over to Mark,
it's a deleted scene. You can find it on the internet though.
I really love this movie.
Based on a real commercial.
But don't want to discount the contributions of the friend of Paul Thomas Anderson, an artist, Jeremy Blake, who graduated from Art Institute of Chicago, and he also went to the California Institute of the Arts. But all of the art installations that are in between almost each act, each scene, are really pretty. And he tragically committed suicide because his girlfriend or his wife had committed suicide, apparent suicide. And then he ended up, tragically, he walked into the ocean, Rockaway Beach.
Wow, I didn't know that.
In New York, yeah. And he took off all his clothes, walked on the beach. And then 20 days later, his body was found.
Jeez.
And he left a note. And this is something that's still debated to this day. But according to his note, he had files and files that Scientologists were harassing him and his girlfriend that drove her to kill herself and him to kill himself.
Was he a Scientologist?
He was not, but he became very good friends with Beck and did some album covers for Beck. And apparently they were saying the connection there was that when he started meeting Beck, they started kind of coming after him to either join or whatever.
Jeez, I did not know that.
Yeah, and so it's a really crazy story if you look it up. I don't know the exact details. I don't want to misquote anyone, but his name was Jeremy Blake, really great artist. All those art installations that you'll see throughout the movie that really fit in well with the score and the color palette that PT did in this movie. But yeah, it's kind of a crazy story.
Yeah, this film, between the, like you said, the art, the design, the camera work, the music, has a lightness about it that Magnolia doesn't. It has
It is a great companion piece to that. Yeah, you're right.
It has a very airiness to to it that that Magnolia does not have. Magnolia is much more of a. I feel like it's a darker. It's more of a brooding kind of. Kind of like a train that doesn't stop.
And Emily Watson is really good in this movie.
Yes.
And the last thing I'll say too, though, is I forget how much I would like this, but just watch the birthday scene when he comes home. When Barry when you first see him and how he snaps, how bad his sisters are to him.
Right.
It's unbelievable. I can't remember all of the quotes right now, but just immediately when he walks in, it's like, they're commenting on judging him,
Yeah.
commenting on his suit. I think doesn't one of them say that he's gay?
Yeah.
And then that's what like turns him over the edge, and like he just doesn't want to be there, and they're just so mean to him.
Breaking the sliding glass door.
Oh God, yeah. And this is what's crazy about this movie too, though, is it's only 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's a surprising turn.
This is I don't know if Paul Thomas would have made this movie if the reaction to Magnolia wasn't so mixed. If it wasn't such a, because critically it was like praised, commercially it was not. And he kept joking. He's like, next movie I'm making, a 90-minute romantic comedy, and everyone's like, oh, that's funny, like. And then he would say, yeah, the next movie I'm making is a romantic comedy with Adam Sandler, and people were like just laughed it off, like, oh, that's funny, like based on his previous work, that doesn't seem like it would fit in the canon. And then sure enough, he writes Punch Drunk Love, and I just wanted to, if I quickly could just read the synopsis or the quick description of this movie, because I wanted to say it out loud because I think it's really hilarious to think it's like it's totally right on, obviously, but like if you haven't seen this movie, I think this will be funny. So in IMDb, they call it a psychologically troubled novelty supplier is nudged towards a romance with an English woman, all the while being extorted by a phone sex line run by a crooked mattress salesman and purchasing stunning amounts of pudding. I don't know. I read that.
That is
that is true. I mean, it's all accurate, but it's just like it's kind of a really funny.
It is accurate. I wonder if this script parallels what he was feeling at the time, because if you think about it, if you think of Barry Egan as Paul Thomas Anderson, not saying that he lashes out like that, because I don't think he's known for that, but it could be in his head. But just think about the fact that he goes to work and he's got all these people who are specialists apparently, and everyone's just constantly berating him with like, do you need this order? Do you need that order? And then he's got the phone sex line, and then everyone's just coming down on him, like his sisters, like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And then at the end of the day, he just wants to fall in love, and he does it. And it's funny too, because Emily Watson is so great in it. And if you've seen the movie, I'm sure you're listening to this if you've seen the movie, but it's not really a spoiler alert, but you really find out that he's found his equal. Like when they're going to have their sex scene in Hawaii. Yeah. That's like my favorite part, one of them, because they're so intimate with each other, and you're like, man, how is this guy going to become intimate? And then he says, like, she's like, I want to bite your face off. Right, and he's like, what does he say? Like, I'm going to punch you or break your neck.
Yeah, just want to,
they're the same person. Yeah. It's just really funny.
Yeah, no, this movie was, I didn't know what to expect from it. My wife and I saw it in the theater, and, following up Boogie Nights, or Magnolia, excuse me, is a
tall order.
It's a tough undertaking, but
I think it gets better every time I see this movie.
Yeah, it's a good film, and it's worth checking out, and it's certainly, I think one of more Adam Sandler's more critically acclaimed films too. He's great in this movie. So
he's so good, sir. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. Why, sir? Did you bust up the bathroom? No. Are you sure? Yeah. Well, your hand's bleeding, sir. Well, I cut myself with my knife, so I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. The bathroom's just destroyed. So good.
Yeah. So yeah, check it out. Punch Drunk Love.
Oh, and one little other, if this was a film paper, Adam Sandler playing the realistic version of all his previous characters, that his man-child characters. Right. Just like Billy Madison, obsessed with the snack packs.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Getting the coupons.
And these ones are the healthy choice ones. Remember that?
That's right.
Yeah. That's pretty funny. Yeah, moving on.
One of my other favorites of all time.
5 years later, he comes out with a film. Probably most people consider this like his greatest film to date.
I love this movie.
And it's There Will Be Blood. It came out in 2007.
Might be one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. A lot of people consider this. A lot of publications put this as their best film of the 2000s, of the decade, of the 2000 to 2010.
Of the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't disagree with them. I'm a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan, so I'm biased. But I think this came out. It was a strong year because this was No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, which I think this is superior to No Country.
I love No Country for Old Men, but again, I like this movie a lot better.
I agree. Daniel Day-Lewis,
really
man,
you can't really compare. It's not like it's hard to it's all art. So like It's not like you're comparing two athletes or something. It's
both great, but great additions to art. But I definitely lean towards this one a little bit more. Give us some trivia.
Yes,
Trivia man.
If you haven't
Dance, monkey, dance.
if you haven't seen There Will Be Blood, please do so. It's really it's in a screenplay written by Paul Thomas. It's based on a book called Oil by Upton Sinclair. Which again, it's one of those things where it's like it's kind of inspired by that, but it's not
like loosely
really,
based.
Yeah, it's not really like it's kind of inspired by a lot of things. And Paul Thomas said he had in mind that Daniel Day-Lewis would play this part and no one else. And if he couldn't get Daniel, he wouldn't have made the movie. And I'm glad Daniel Day-Lewis did it because I think, and his process is so weird. And I think it's kind of like, he's one of those like kind of, sort of.
Well, I mean, he's the epitome
process
he's the epitome and an example of what method acting is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's his process. He's completely inhabits the character.
And I love that Daniel Plainview is the character he plays, and I love his voice choice in the movie. I guess
my name is Daniel Plainview,
and I didn't know this
I'm an oil
until
man.
my recent research that voice, because I was always like, "Where's that voice from?"
This is my son H.W.
And he said, "Thank you."
I could do that all day.
And he said that it's based on John Huston, the director, his voice, because I never heard John Huston talk.
Oh, that
before.
actually makes sense now.
But apparently, there's some recordings and stuff of him. And,
I can see that.
And Paul Thomas, I think Paul Thomas shared those with him because he thought this would be a great thing, and he wasn't sure if Daniel Day-Lewis would take to it or not. And sure enough, he really liked that and thought it fitted the character well.
I abandoned my boy.
Cinematic.
I abandoned my boy.
Abandoned my child. The cinematography in this movie, which was some notable awards were Daniel Day-Lewis did win Best
Actor,
Academy
Award
for this, and it was nominated for a bunch, but the two winners were acting and cinematography. So Robert Elswit won for this film too, and it's a gorgeous looking film. That whole sequence where the oil derrick finally explodes.
Oh yeah, it's a masterclass.
It's just great, and the costuming, Daniel Plainview, Daniel Day
Plainview,
Daniel Day Plainview, Daniel Day-Lewis, his scenes with please give me the name, the kid, the younger guy.
I think it's just funny waiting to see if you can get it. Paul Dano.
Paul Dano, thank you. The two of them are so great in this film.
Oh, they're unbelievable.
The sizing up of each other, they're both after something that only each other can provide,
and they're both snake oil salesmen.
And they're both snake oil salesmen. They're both trying to, one up the other, and they're constantly, in that tug of war the whole film. Man, I would say what's amazing about this movie too is it goes nearly 15 minutes before anyone says anything either. It's like
Are you talking about when he's like in the
in
the
whole opening of the
hole
film,
or the what do you even call that when you try to dig for oil? Is that like a I don't know.
I call it a hole.
It's just a hole. That is a great opening.
But it's so interesting because you don't even notice when you're seeing, like, a lot of times if you watch a movie and you went 15 or 20 minutes and no one talked, you'd be like, what's going on? But in that movie, you're like so into it already, like you're just so wrapped up in what's going on. And
yeah, it's so beautiful.
And considering a guy like Daniel Day-Lewis doesn't talk for 15 minutes, is it's pretty great. And I also learned, I didn't know this till recently, like, a lot of the scenes, a lot of the like long monologues and stuff, he improvised a lot of it too, which I think is, it just shows you how prepared of an actor he, how engrossed he is in that character that he can just, do that without seeming out of character,
Well, what's crazy too about this, or not crazy, I should say, but what's great about this is the way, Daniel Plainview is sort of the example of someone who is obsessed with being successful, with getting what they want, and going out and doing it. And this was at a time when there weren't a lot of restrictions for people, and if you did the work, it would happen. He is sort of a snake oil salesman, stealing oil from different people's lands and whatnot, and setting up his oil rigs. But you have him clashing with Paul Dano, who has realized that his small town is gullible and that he can, take them over basically. And you have this clash of the titans where there's a video essay that said this. In the beginning of the film, when Daniel Day-Lewis goes over to basically take the land from Paul Dano's dad, yeah, there's a video. I forget what video essay is. It might be the one we were talking about that says about how he uses limited cuts in this film.
I believe that's the one. Yeah.
But he's focusing all his attention on Paul Dano's dad, and then you quickly realize Paul Dano keeps bugging him in his ear, like, what about this? What about this? And you realize Paul Dano is the matriarch of that family, and then his attention shifts to Paul Dano, and then it's close up on Paul Dano and Daniel Day-Lewis. And that meeting where they're going punch for punch is great. And then you see this beautiful basically symphony of Daniel Plainview just playing Paul Dano's character in the film up until, he gets cleansed and baptized in Paul Dano's church. Because I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I believe the deal was if you come and get baptized, I'll let you have the land.
Yeah.
And so he does, but you can tell Daniel Plainview is playing him because he gets into it like a character, and then as soon as the water hits his head, he starts smiling, and then he even talks to himself, and he goes something like, "I got that oil playing," or whatever he says. It's just great. And the last thing I'll say about it, though, is the relationship between father and son. Ultimately, you want to root for him because he's got this kid. He wants to take care of this kid. And you follow him throughout the movie, and you're like, all right, you know what? Anything that he does that seems a little crazy, like one of the best scenes in the entire movie, when they're at the restaurant, he orders the steak or whatever, and he goes over to the guys that are competing with him, and he's like, I'm going to come to your house at night, and I'm going to slit your throat. That's one of my favorite scenes. But so
That isn't saying that someone would say that. Too.
Oh, well, he's so larger than life, this character. Yeah. But this whole movie, you're kind of defending him to yourself in the back of your head, like, all right, well, he's doing it for his son, he's doing it for family. As soon as his son goes deaf, he's useless to him. Yeah. And then he completely disowns him. And at the end, the entire last scene of this movie,
but he does take care of him. Like he sends him to the. It's weird. He's a conflicting guy because he's.
Well, that's what is such a great character.
Because he's. Like when the guy comes around that supposedly is his brother, and then
that's a great scene.
And then you can tell that he kind of wants to believe it. Like he wants to he wants family around. Like he wants to have that, not to use a pun, but he wants that blood. Like he wants to have that. And
the only sorry, and then, he doesn't say this line, but I would have wrote it in where he goes, the only thing thicker than blood is oil. He should say that.
But I think, when he finds out that guy's just an imposter and just a fraud, that's when I think he takes the turn of no one really cares about me. They just want what I got, But in the same token, he's really doing that to other people too. So there's a sort of weird conflict.
Well, speaking of him,
his scene with his older son at the end is just heartbreaking. Bastard in a basket.
You're a bastard, and I can't even do it. I drink your milkshake.
But bastard.
I drink it up. The one thing I will say about the dude who pretends to be his brother, I can never remember the actor's name, and I do this with my friends all the time because I think it's just kind of funny. But the only thing I
pretend to be their brother.
No. So the actor who plays him, he's a character actor. I'll look it up right now, but. The one thing I was joking around with my friends with is every time I see that guy, all I think about is him in The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. So in The Mummy, he plays sort of the sidekick kind of character. He's like the expert of Kevin J. O'Connor is his name. And all I hear in my head is his voice in that movie when he's like, oh my God, the Beatles, like that. And that's his voice in the movie. And that's all I can hear when I just hear him yelling at Brendan Fraser about Beatles or whatever. This movie's incredible. Great score by Johnny Greenwood.
Of Radiohead fame.
Is Jimmy Greenwood or Johnny Greenwood?
Johnny, yeah.
I don't know why I was second guessing myself there.
It was Johnny, you're right.
Yeah, no, this score is just incredible. The cinematography is amazing. You definitely got to watch it. It's one of my favorites. Yeah. Another one that gets better with every viewing.
You know what it made me long for too is good denim jeans. I don't know why they have because it's of the era where all those guys were starting to wear a lot of denim. Because
right.
Levi's was making that sort of fabric for prospectors and things. Anyway, that's a random thought.
So we're not talking about Janoon, right? His documentary.
No.
All right, so we're talking about feature films here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So moving on, the next film again, another 5 years later, is a film called The Master, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix. Master came out in 2012. This was his first movie without Bob Elswit, DP.
Right, Mihai Malamar Jr. shot it.
And it's a beautiful film too, and they did not shoot on anamorphic. I don't know what the reasoning was for this film. I think they shot a lot of high like 70 millimeter. I don't know if the whole film was though. That's the one thing I don't know for sure, because I know the 70 millimeter camera is very loud, and I think that's the only reason why guys like.
Well, it says it was shot almost entirely on 65 millimeter film stock, making it the first fiction feature to be shot and released in 70 millimeter since Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet in '96.
Yeah. So yeah, I knew they shot in large format. I wasn't sure if it was all because Christopher Nolan doesn't like to shoot with the large format for dialogue scenes because he doesn't like to. He likes to get all the dialogue on the day of the shoot and not do a lot of ADR if he can help it. And I guess the camera is kind of loud. So either way, The Master is a film I own, but I've only seen it one time because I have moved on from DVD players now, pretty much, and I have not seen it ever since I have watched it the one time. And so I'm not as like entrenched in this movie as I am with these others. I'll be completely honest with you in that regard. But essentially, this movie is about Scientology.
Or at least the beginnings of it, of Dianetics.
Yeah, it's kind of thinly veiled, very thinly veiled. It's not like Philip Seymour Hoffman basically plays the Ron L. Hubbard or whatever.
Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard, excuse me, in this film. And Joaquin Phoenix is a broken man. Another guy with a troubled past that comes under the tutelage of Philip Seymour Hoffman and basically becomes like his guinea pig in terms of experimenting on him with like with this religion, with his Scientology,
with different treatments and whatnot.
Right. And Philip Seymour Hoffman is incredible in this movie. He's incredible in everything he does, and it's a shame that he's passed because I really thought he was hitting his stride with like Capote and even the funny movies he's in. But this movie especially, because he was like you're so transfixed on him, and he has like such long takes, and he really really commands the screen. And he commands the screen everything he does. Like when he plays the nurse, the attendant in Magnolia that's taking care of Jason Robot's character. He has the great scene where he calls. He makes the call, and he's like, that scene in the movie where the guy calls and wants to help. That's that scene. He does these really, really great long, beautiful monologues, and it's a shame that he's no longer with us. But he's great in this movie. And Joaquin is almost always good. I mean, he's always like very like what I like about him is I see him as like you may not agree with his acting choices, you may not agree like with certain like weird quirks and tics that he does, but I think you can tell that he's trying very hard. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I can see him.
I don't like when people phone it in. I you can tell in movies, and it's hard to do in a Paul Thomas movie because I don't think he's going to cast you if you're, you know what I mean, if you're going to do that. But he's brilliant in this film. So
he's really dirty and gross in this movie.
Yeah,
he's just like a low human being. Physically,
that's the way I feel about it too. I'm like he's just like reprehensible.
What I'll say about this movie is And I know there's probably other Paul Thomas Anderson purists.
Amy Adams is great too. Sorry, I didn't want to.
No, Amy Adams is good in it. Rami Malek is good from Mr. Robot. Laura Dern, Kevin J. O'Connor, once again, the guy I was just talking about, who played Daniel Plainview's alleged brother. He plays the guy that Philip Seymour Hoffman goes, "You pig fuck," and he calls it because he discounts his book. I will say it has probably.
What about Amy Adams gives him a handy?
I seriously was just going to say that. I was going to say this is the best unwanted hand job in front of a mirror at night with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Amy Adams in cinematic history. But what I will say, I know there are some P.T. Anderson.
This movie should have been called Hand Job, actually.
No, it should have been called The Master Bait.
Just going to leave that right there.
Just going to leave it there for the taking. What I was going to say, though, what I was getting to is it looks beautiful. The movie is shot beautifully. Johnny Greenwood, once again, great score. But as a Paul Thomas Anderson fan, is a big fan of his. I'm just not a huge fan of this movie compared to his other work. And I know we're going to talk about Inherent Vice too. And
You were saying this is where I think you feel like it tapers off some of his.
I feel like he changes who he is a
Current
little bit.
works,
Like
yeah.
I understand. So I think There Will Be Blood is sort of, it's his foray into a little bit more of like an epic filmmaking, longer takes, slower camera movements, slower tracking shots, more based on performance, which I appreciate. And I think like once he hit that, he could have stayed in that There Will Be Blood lane. And I think The Master, he goes a little bit too much, a little too far off of that, and he tries a little too hard. And then
The script is a little more complex, I feel like.
yeah, it's a very complex script. It goes over a
Master.
long period of time.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not discounting the movie. I wasn't like a huge fan of it, but what I was a fan of it though was and this is going to sound weird, but cinematography is beautiful, score was great. Philip Seymour Hoffman is amazing. Joaquin Phoenix was pretty good. He kind of annoyed me, but I mean he played the role really well. So everything inside of the movie is great. Paul Thomas Anderson's directing and his composition was amazing. Just as a movie as a whole, it just didn't hit me as strongly as Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and then
Well, I think
There Will Be Blood.
I think because maybe the characters are not as likable either. Like even Daniel Plainview in his most
Right, you
'cause
kind of admired him.
He becomes very unlikable at the end.
Right.
Where these guys, I think from the jump are
Everyone's
like you
really
said-
slimy.
Yeah, everyone's just gross. Like there's just something about them that's yeah. I get what you're saying. There's something about like it's hard to really like root for anybody in this film. you
Yeah,
know?
and it is a well-made movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just saying in his oeuvre, it is not high on my list. That's
Yeah,
all.
like you could obviously watch way worse films. I mean, this is
Yeah.
it's like I said, I own this film, but I've seen it the one time, and I wanted to see it again, but I've kind of abandoned the Blu-ray, so I need to find it streaming somewhere. But
Well, this is a movie I need to see another time, along with Inherent Vice, which we'll talk about. But I feel like with his movies, a good way to kind of describe it is with Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and There Will Be Blood, you could watch it one time and really enjoy it and be content with that. With this one, I feel like, and Inherent Vice, I'm going to have to watch it like 2 or 3 times just in order to kind of like it. But I don't like when movies have... But, I mean, it interests me enough to want to see it again. It just didn't grab me the first time, that's all.
yeah. Well, let's move on to the last film, and then we'll do our rankings here.
Yeah, Inherent Vice, I was super excited for.
Yeah.
Uh,
2014.
2014. I thought the marketing was right up my alley. It had the female legs with like the neon and had like the 70s flair to it. I was super excited that he got
California.
Super California, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Robert Elswit was back. The Prodigal Son returned.
Anamorphic.
It's much more handheld. Some tracking shots, but and this movie is one I'm going to have to see again too. And I'm sort of starting to appreciate it after only having seen it once. After I first saw it, I was like, what did I just watch? Like, it's...
Yeah, I really liked this movie. I didn't think I was going to like it because my buddy, Veal Chop, who turned me on to it, he's kind of my... If he usually sees these movies before I do because he can go to the theater whenever he wants to, where I have family and other... But he was like, I walked out of this movie, and I was like, oh, man... And I didn't, because of that, and because other people saying similar things, I did not watch this movie for a long time. I didn't see it in the theater. I didn't see it when it first came out. I didn't see this until it was on HBO. Like it was on HBO one day. I was like, well, I got to watch this movie. This is my favorite director, and I just been like avoiding it because I didn't know what to expect. And maybe my expectations were low enough where I was like, this is kind of interesting. I liked it. It's very weird. It's kind of surreal. It's almost like. It's not as bizarre as like Fear and Loathing, but it's in that kind of sort of.
And I hear a lot of
hippie,
people who
druggy
love
realm,
who love the author that it's based on, Thomas Pynchon or Pynchon. They say it's just like his book, which I can see. It's all over the place. It's almost like you're high when you watch. When you're watching it, it's like you're high. What I will say, love the performances in this movie. Josh Brolin is really, really funny.
Yeah,
the whole scene with him in the banana in the car.
Yeah.
Is really good. Catherine...
It looks like the 70s, too, which I love.
And actually, that's something that
Robert
Robert Elswit, I think, did a great job with. You coming from The Master, which, almost had like a art photography composition to it, if that makes sense, where like every frame could have been a
Very
picture.
shallow depth of field.
Yeah, everything was like a picture, very artistic. Inherent Vice is sort of your classic 70s. We have a camera, we have this location for a limited amount of time. The lead character is always high and kind of out of his head. How can we match that? And so it looks that way. And Elswit did a really great job with this. But Josh Brolin's really good in this movie. Great cameo by Martin Short.
Oh, right.
And Reese Witherspoon.
He's great, yeah. Maya Rudolph makes an appearance.
Maya Rudolph does.
E.T.'s wife.
Wow, Owen Wilson. And then Catherine Waterston. Yeah. Really breakthrough performance for her. And she was, it's not like she's...
I love the Last Supper shot, too. I thought that was pretty cool.
No, that was really good.
The hippie commune where they all have pizza. It's like...
There's a great take, and I forget what the context of the scene was, but I think it's where Catherine Waterston is basically completely nude, and it's like an all one take as she like enters the room and is trying to seduce Joaquin, and the camera doesn't cut, and it's really, really good, really well done. And this is like a breakout role for her. I haven't been a big fan of what she's done after that, of what I've seen her in, but she's really, really good in this movie, and she feels like she belongs in the 70s. But yeah, no, I understand, that people who love the book love the movie because it's sort of erratic. I need to see it again. I think maybe I enjoyed this more than The Master, just off of the one time I saw each of them, because I was like in it a lot. I kind of was taken out a few times, but then I got back in it again. Like I love the whole sequence when he goes to like the Asian massage house, because I love detective movies. Yeah. And he is like a terrible detective, but or PI, and I just love scenes like that. And they were very true to that 70s style. And he definitely, he knows his stuff, obviously, with Boogie Nights in the 70s. But this is he does a good job with it.
It's an interesting return to form in some ways, because it has, like you said, Bob Elswit back to the anamorphic, back to like long tracking shots, back to a mostly pop music score. And again, it's another movie that Joaquin, I think, like totally inherits. Like he just totally like fills that role. He's just really good. And
yeah, I think it almost like we were saying.
I was definitely entertained by it. I don't know if I completely, like I said, like I have to watch it again, because I feel like I don't know if there's layers to it, like all his films, that like maybe I don't completely absorb everything, but I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was more so than The Master. The Master was like a little too heavy for me.
Yeah, no, I was more entertained than The Master. And I think, like we were saying, if There Will Be Blood was sort of like the apex of where he wanted to go, changing from his normal style, then The Master, maybe he went a little too far right. I feel like Inherent Vice is maybe like one step back in the right direction. Right. So I'm hoping that...
All these films, I feel like, are almost like reactions to the last thing he made,
Yeah.
I think.
And so I'm curious to see what he's going to do with his new movie with Daniel Day-Lewis. Yeah. Is it going to be more There Will Be Blood, or is he going to go back to like Magnolia and
it's a period piece, so
it might be more like The Master. Yeah, but I will say though, having Daniel Day-Lewis though is like, I could watch him do anything. So he just commands the screen.
But you're right. It's funny. Like now that we've kind of unfolded his whole library of films. It's like all of these are like reactions. Like Boogie Nights is sort of this on the surface kind of fun, fast-paced, entertaining. Obviously got some dark moments, but it's like a fun kind of ride. And then Magnolia is like the complete opposite of that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then Punch Drunk Love is the complete opposite of that.
Right, it's a reaction. Yeah.
There Will Be Blood is the complete opposite. And like, everything is, if anything, There Will Be Blood and The Master almost are similar because of their sort of telling of kind of real life, almost like a real life people, like an amalgamation of real life people, and that they're period pieces, and sort of at the formulation of like either the oil industry or or Scientology and The Master's take.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say about Paul Thomas Anderson, I don't think he's made a bad film. So even though we're ranking these, Tony Kukoc, Steve Kerr, top 5. I don't look at this as like, man, that's the worst movie in the bunch. None of them are bad movies. We're just putting them in order of preference and what we think represent Paul Thomas Anderson the best.
Yeah.
So shall we deliberate?
On that note, yeah.
And now it's time to announce the best of the best.
Okay, we are back. Not so sweaty this time. I think this was a little.
This is probably the fastest deliberation we've ever had.
Yeah. This was a little easier.
We
for
both
us.
had exactly the same lists in exactly the same order. There was no fighting at all. It was just admiring.
We didn't need anyone to mediate.
Right. We didn't need to bring Jerry Seinfeld back from his canceled TV show, The Wedding Ref or whatever it was called.
Steve.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of films. He only has 7 films. So we basically ranked the 7 like we normally do, and in the what we call the Tony Kukoc Steve Kerr spots, for number 7 and number 6, we have at number 7 The Master, what we just talked about recently, obviously, and number 6 Inherent Vice. I think Neal and I are both on this in the camp that these are certainly, you could do much worse in terms of spending 2 hours or 3 hours watching a film, but these are certainly not the strongest examples of Paul Thomas Anderson's work, in our opinion. So,
yeah, great films by a great director. Amazing collaborators on all sides, in front and behind the camera. But we put these there. We know they're his 2 most recent films, but I think our list is pretty strong. So let's kick it to the movie trailer guy.
Number 5.
Hard 8. This is Paul Thomas's first feature film that we discussed. We decided this is a number 5 film because it's really the intro into the world that is Paul Thomas Anderson, and you see a lot of his early signs of his style, early collaborations with Philip Seymour Hoffman, John C. Reilly, Philip Baker Hall, everyone that has a middle initial or middle name in the industry, and it's certainly more derivative of a Scorsese film or a De Palma, style, and but he's really flexing his muscles in this, and like I said, this is another screenplay by him as well. So at number 5, I think Hard 8 deserves to be in the top 5.
Number 4.
Punch Drunk Love. Like we said, to put it simply, sort of an underrated film. Paul Thomas Anderson's shortest film. Adam Sandler gives a great performance as Barry Egan along with Emily Watson. It's sort of the romantic comedy for people with anxiety. Beautiful score, art installations by Jeremy Blake in between the scenes. Cinematography by Robert Elswit is really, really great. And across the board, this is one of those movies that I think people write off because as soon as they see Adam Sandler drama, but they don't want to see it. But it's not even really a drama; it's a dark comedy. And we put this one here because it was sort of a reaction to Magnolia, and people kind of almost dared him, "Hey, you can't make a 90-minute romantic comedy in your own style," and he did it, and it was really good.
Number 3.
Boogie Nights. This is, not much more we can say about this film. The performances are excellent. The soundtrack is amazing. This is, after Hard 8 was a super ambitious, epic but yet personal story. Robert Elswit's camera work in this is amazing. A lot of the whip pans, the really nice scene transitions, a lot of the montages. This movie has probably more montages than most of his other films. And all around excellent portrayal by Mark Wahlberg, who really, not his first film, but certainly his most standout film, probably what catapulted him.
You got the touch!
Probably what catapulted him into stardom that he is now. So, number 3, Boogie Nights.
Number 2.
There Will Be Blood. Daniel Day-Lewis gives an amazing performance.
Daniel Plainview, are you here?
I'm here to take your oil and your milkshake.
Okay.
Do the rest of it like that, please.
The whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
A beautiful score by the scribe Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead fame. I brought on wonderful collaborators like Paul Dano and the man who played H.W., my son, who went deaf. That bastard in a basket, that filth of his mother's womb. Robert Elswit won a deserved Oscar for his perfect cinematography. Many say this is the greatest film of the 21st century, and I, Daniel Plainview, agree. And if you do not, I will come over to your house, where you sleep, and will cut your throat.
Let's take
There Will Be Blood.
At number 1, the best of the best is...
Magnolia. Of course, number one is going to be Magnolia. It was the last film that was left. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
This is my favorite film of all time, so there's no reason why I wouldn't put it at number one in the Paul Thomas Anderson canon of films. Neil agree with me wholeheartedly. And really, simply said, this film is the antithesis. It is the if you only saw one film and you've never seen any Paul Thomas Anderson's movies, and someone said, what is Paul Thomas Anderson's style? What was the best representation of what he does? And I think Magnolia, even though this film came out 18 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about, it is certainly, for me, the culmination of everything he does best. Really great long takes, really great characters, really great casting in terms of that. Great screenplay, beautiful dialogue, beautiful cinematography, camera movement, the whole thing. Brilliant soundtrack by Emmy Mann. You can't go wrong with this film. So definitely deserves the number one spot.
Yeah, Magnolia is a worthy number one. Like Mark said, if there's one movie that you should see of Paul Thomas Anderson to get an idea of his flavor, what he's about, this is the one. I was just reminded of that great scene where William H. Macy as Quiz Kid Donnie Smith is he's like driving the car and he goes to park and he just completely forgets to stop and he goes right into the store and he goes, "Hey, that was Quiz Kid Donnie Smith." He like breaks the window. Oh God, it's so good. But yeah, please check out this movie. This is a great episode. I'm really glad we're going to do these this director series. I feel like, knowing that he doesn't have that many films, just like P.T. Anderson, I feel like our next progression to sort of build is let's just go Fincher, one of our favorites. Yeah. So maybe we'll do Fincher next.
Talk about David Fincher.
Make sure to tweet us and let us know your favorite Paul Thomas Anderson moments, what films you like the best. If you've seen his movies, if you haven't, watch them and then tell us what you think. Make sure to reach out to us on Twitter and Instagram at Best of Best Pod, or on Facebook, facebook.com/bestofbestpod, or is it Best of the Best Pod?
I don't know, but if you go to bestofthebestpod.com, you can find links to all of our Stitcher, iTunes, social media accounts, everything. So that's the best way.
Yeah, brand new
we have
website.
So many accounts, it's always hard for me to remember exactly what our name is.
Just go to the website, bestofthebestpod.com. Please tell your friends about this podcast. We've been trying to spread the word. We're still looking to get 25 reviews in order to send a prize to someone that we pull out of a hat.
You assholes.
Yeah, we have 10 right now. Shout out to DJ New Style for the really nice review he just gave us recently. So thank you for that.
Shout out to anyone who's listening. We really appreciate it. So
we don't know who a lot of you are, but we appreciate it.
And on that note, I want to leave you with a little clip of Tom Cruise from Magnolia.
Oh, this is going to be a good one.
All right. Bye, guys.
See ya.
Respect the cock. And tame the cunt. Tame it. Take it on head first with the skills that I will teach you at work, and say, "No! No! You will not control me. No! No! You will not take my soul. No! No! You will not win this game." Because it is a game, guys. You want to think it's not, huh? You want to think it's not, you go back to the schoolyard and you have that crush on big-titted Mary Jane. Respect the cock.
Thanks for listening. If you think we've missed any of your favorites, message us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @BestOfBestPod and include your own top 5 by using the hashtag BOTB. We ask that you rate, review, and subscribe to Best of the Best on iTunes or your preferred podcast app. Have ideas for show topics, opinions, or just want to say hello? Send us an email to bestofthebestpod@gmail.com. Till next time, special thanks to Radar Studios and long live Don Hogue.